Hi, church family. Happy Sabbath. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this series titled If These Pews Could Talk. Our stories are encouraging to others. And so it is our prayer that as you listen to these sacred stories told by our own church members, that you might be encouraged and that you might encourage someone else with your own sacred story. I'm excited to introduce Patricia Hall, or as we know her, Trish Hall, as our speaker for today. Trish has really done it all, let me tell you. She got a bachelor's degree in accounting and business administration. She got a master's degree in psychology and Christian counseling. She worked in both of those professions before she found flipping houses to be extremely rewarding and fun and less stressful. And she has so many hobbies like quilting and sewing, and she's so good at all of the crafty things. I have seen firsthand her work, and she is amazing. She's been married to Don now for 11 years and enjoys doing health ministry with him. And she has 3 beautiful kids and 6 wonderful grandkids. So she's got a big, beautiful family, and we know that she's filled with a lot of love, and I'm just excited to hear her story today and to give the time over to her. I hope that you all will be blessed.
Hi, church family. I miss you. I miss y'all a whole bunch, and I'm sure you're missing people too. And today I wanted to kind of start with a short prayer. Lord, please guide me today as I've put this together and wrote and rewrote and tried to remember every time you intervened in my life and how you helped. I know that there's a lot of intervention going on now, Lord, for lots of people, and I would like you to help everybody go through this and do a much better job than we're doing so we can get out of this soon. I ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Hi, church family. I kind of have a different background than most people in our church, I'm sure, though I've met quite a few ex-Catholics in the Adventist church. And I'd have to say it's probably because once they start studying and reading that Bible, they find out this church is really Bible believing and that it has some truth, a lot of truth. I was born in 1951, March 19th. I was born in the back seat of a car. That's kind of weird, but I was a 49 Packard. My grandma and grandpa were driving, and my grandmother had to climb over the seat to deliver me in that car. And when I asked my mother if I was born on the Golden Gate Bridge, like a lot of family members were saying, she said no. She said, when I was pushing your shoulders out, I looked up and there was a sign for San Quentin, so there you go. My dad wasn't home at the time because he was over in Korea, and he was actually lost. A lot of military guys got lost during the winter in Korea in 1951, and my dad was one of them. He paratrooped in with the 101st Screaming Eagles, waiting to invade into China, which never happened. Anyway, my dad, I didn't meet him until I was 5 months old. My brother was born 9 months later. My brother and I were both baptized at the same time at St. Joseph's Catholic Church, which is in El Cerrito, California, which is where my grandparents lived and where we ended up living. And I was living there before I was even born with my mom, who moved to live with my grandparents. My mom was Catholic. My only grandparents that I ever knew were Baptist. In fact, my grandfather and my grandmother both had younger brothers who were Baptist ministers, so it was a very Baptist family. My mom didn't know anything about Protestant families other than what the Catholic Church said, which wasn't a lot of good stuff. So my parents finally moved out when my dad got out of the military, and actually the military put us in housing at one point. But for a while they were living in a chicken coop, and I had to go back and live with Grandma and Grandpa because I kept getting sick. I had problems with bronchitis. And so I had to go stay with them. And so they finally moved out. They bought their own home with the GI Bill. And my dad had put a swing set in the backyard for us kids, and he set it in cement, but he didn't bother to put anything through it so that when it swang back and forth too high, the whole thing tipped over with me in it, and it fractured my skull. I was 3 years old, and my mother was pregnant with my sister, just a little bit over 6 months, not much. And I woke up 5 days later. My sister was born the day after this accident. They told my mother that I was going to be brain damaged, and my grandparents, and everybody was mad at my dad for not doing this right. What did my dad go do? He went out and got drunk, which is what he did a lot. And so here he had my mother, my sister, and me all in the hospital. And I woke up after 3 days and said to my grandma, who was asleep with the Bible on her chest and her glasses down to like here, I said to her, Grandma, do I get ice cream? And she wakes up and she says, oh, honey, why do you want ice cream? Oh, why do you think you get that? And I said, well, because I'm in a hospital, and that's what all the other kids got when they go to the hospital. Because back in the 50s, they used to take everybody's tonsils out, and all the kids loved the idea that they could eat all the ice cream they wanted. So I knew that, and my grandmother immediately said a big prayer out to God of, thank you, God, so much. You know, she's not brain damaged like they said. So I did have some problems, though, because I did fracture the back of my skull. Every beautician who's ever done my hair said, what happened to you? And I had vestibular problems, balance issues, and I still have some today. But the doctor, Dr. O'Regan, who was our family doctor, said, put her in dance classes. That will help her gait and her ability to have to walk the right way and to balance right. So I started dance at age 3 after this happened. In fact, my hair had not even grown in up and back, and ponytails were put over it, and I could feel the bristles of my hair back there. But I knew, because my grandmother kept telling me all the time, she had prayed for me. She had prayed for me and had family members praying for me all over the country, so that I didn't end up brain damaged because of God, because the doctors said I would be brain damaged, and I wasn't. And then that was in 1953. My sister was born premature, and she was partially deaf and partially had really bad vision issues too. She eventually became diabetic, so I always felt very bad that this accident, happened, and my sister had problems, and I had problems that eventually, just went away from all of the activities that I did. My brain made up for it. And then in 1957, on September 17th, my dad died. He was 27 years old. And prior to that, jump back a little bit, he had taken me to church, and it's the only time I remember going to church when I was little. And this was after the accident, because I don't have a lot of memories before that. And he took me to church down the street, and when we walked in, there was this great, big, huge stained glass window. And this stained glass window had that beautiful picture of Christ carrying the black sheep on his shoulder with the lamb this way, as big as this window. It was just huge. And when you came down, it was a very small Nazarene church, very narrow aisle. And I was walking with my dad, holding his hand, and I said, Dad, who is that? And I pointed at that window, and it just seemed to be shining all over the place. And he said, that's Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. And I'd never, I knew that Jesus was the reason we had Christmas, but so was Santa Claus as far as I knew at that age. And I was about 4. But that's how I got introduced to the Lord, was through my dad, who wasn't a real good example. But he died in 1957, drinking too. And it was a very sad situation for all of us. My mom didn't even drive, and there was 3 of us. My brother, who was 14 months younger, and my sister, who was only 3. I was the only one let to go to the funeral. And I have to say, it really affected my siblings that they didn't get to go, but they were so young. So going back to public school in the 1st grade, it had only started for about a week or 2, and then I went back after a couple of weeks after my dad died. And I had boys that were making fun of me at school, pushing me down and saying my dad was Casper the Ghost and going boo and all this weird stuff. And they would even follow me home after school, pushing me around, and I would slug them. hit him with my my lunchbox, a metal one with Dale Evans on it. Anyway, my mom was getting fed up with it, and so she finally just put me into Catholic school with my brother. And so that's where my early Christian training went, from first grade on, with the nuns at St. Paul's Catholic School in San Pablo, California. But prior to that even, I had been reading Arthur Maxwell's Bible books. So how did a Baptist family end up with those books? A call porter came to my grandma's house and sold it to her for my cousin Kathy, who was 6 years older than me. And so I would read these books or look at the beautiful pictures. It has some of the most beautiful artwork you've ever seen in them. So if your family doesn't own a set, I would suggest you find one, because they are amazingly wonderful. I grew up with those books. I took those books, in fact, with me to Catholic school. They took them away from me, one of them that I brought in, because Grandma checked them out to me one at a time like a librarian. She was a school teacher, and so she really had all this stuff set up. And they took it from me, and they couldn't find anything wrong with it. But they just said, there's nothing wrong with these books. We just don't want you bringing them in. We just would prefer you not bringing them in. So I didn't bring them anymore. But a lot of kids would ask to borrow them anyway, and I would lend them out and do the same thing my grandma did, the little library checkout card. So then I made my first communion, and I love those books, by the way, those Arthur Maxwell books. And I made my first communion when I was 7. And when studying for that, you have to learn the 10 Commandments. And you have to learn all of these other things about what are the mortal sins and what are the venial sins, and that you have to confess the mortal sins at least, and the venial sins you can kind of pray away on yourself, but it's probably good if you have a bunch of them to go talk to the priest and go to confession. And so I learned about the 4th commandment and about the Sabbath day. But I looked on a calendar and there was no day called Sabbath. So I asked my grandma, who's the school teacher, what's that about? And she told me all about the emperor, the Roman emperor Constantine, and that he had initiated that he would change killing all of the Christians and stop all of this and convert all of the Roman Empire to being Christians if they would change the day. So, but I said to Grandma, you know, is that emperor still around? And she said, oh no, honey, he's been dead, you know, thousands and thousands of years. And I said, well, when he died, why didn't they go back to the Sabbath then? Because they're disobeying God. That's what it says to do. And she says, that's a really good question. Why don't you go ask those Catholics at your school this? So she totally set me up, and I did it. And I didn't take no from an answer for the answer and just behave like the good little girl. Instead, I was very stubborn. And I said, I don't believe this. We should go back to the Sabbath. And so then I got to talk to the principal, who was another nun. Then I was still arguing with her, so she says, I think you need to talk to the priest. So I talked to the priest. And his final comment with me and explaining to me all about the catacombs and how many were fed to lions and blah, 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 though they don't know, but he said thousands and thousands. And what does that mean to a 7-year-old anyway? And so finally he just said, because it saved lives, that's why we did it. That still didn't answer that question I had, because this guy died. You know, he didn't live that long. And we had another, you know, more than 1,900 years to go. So it was always there in my head. I would go to church on Sunday most of the time. But then all of a sudden in the 4th grade, this was still bothering me, 2 years on. And my Aunt Loretta had come to live with us. And she was in her 20s, and she'd just gotten out of the Air Force. And she liked to go to church a lot of times on Saturday evening. And we actually went to a church. I would go with her, because most of the time I went with her to church. And we would go over to a church in Richmond, California. And I did have the name of that down, St. Mark's. It's called St. Mark's Church, and it was downtown. And so I would go with her to St. Mark's in the evening. And then if I slept during the morning part of, you know, before church, or my mother would let me stay up late at night and watch Paladin. So that was a really good reason to watch TV for me, because he scared the tar out of me, but I still liked to watch this guy who was a gunslinger named Have Gun Will Travel was the name of the show. I just adored the show. I have no idea, because he scared me as much as Godzilla did, but I wanted to watch it. So that's one way that I could do the Sabbath, and I knew I was doing the right thing, but I didn't understand about the sunset at the time. But it did make me feel pretty good about it. So I was continuing to do the dancing that I had done from the time I was 3, and then I started left Catholic school in the middle of 5th grade, because we had moved to another community, because my mom didn't like living where we were at in San Pablo, because we weren't too far off of the 101 highway, and there was a lot of traffic, and she just didn't think it was a real safe area. So we moved into Richmond, California, to a very nice area up in the hills there. And I was still dancing, and I was doing, I had a couple of years before that, had been a Sugar Plum Fairy with the San Francisco Ballet Company when they did the Nutcracker. So I had done it for a couple of years, and now this opening came up to be Clara, and I tried out for it, and one of the gals that was chosen, her parents decided they couldn't get her back and forth, and because they lived too far out, and my grandmother said she would be willing to do it with me, so they hired me to do it, and I did get paid for that. And I also had a person from Wage and Hour that would occasionally come and watch and make sure that I wasn't, working too many hours. And there was a standby too, because I couldn't do it as many days a week as a normal person because I was a child. And I think I was 10 going on 11 at the time. Then that's when I was in public school too, by the way. And so my mom was working, but not making a whole lot of money. She was working for an eye doctor, so in Berkeley at the time, and moving to El Cerrito was so much closer. So then I made my confirmation, and I did that in junior high, 7th and 8th grade. But in 7th grade, I had to make a decision as to if I was going to continue to dance or I was going to play the cello. And I had been to an event that was in San Francisco for the orchestra, and had been chosen to go up and sit with one of the people playing in the orchestra. And I just sat next to the guy playing a cello. I had no idea what it was. It would just look like a big violin to me. And that was in the 6th grade. And he explained the whole cello to me, and I just thought it was a great instrument. He even let me play it a couple of times and, strum back and forth. So I ended up playing a cello in 7th grade. And so I had to give up the dance. And I think everybody was happy, because sometimes I was really racking up the money, though I had made money. But, because I was taking tap and ballet and hula and all kinds of stuff, modern jazz. Modern jazz was actually my favorite. So I started playing cello and quit dancing. And my grandfather played the fiddle, but he didn't read music. And so he would see me, reading music, and I'd try to show him, and he was just a big kidder anyway. And so he eventually said to me, while I was just learning, if you learned to play like I did, which is by ear, you'd be a much better player. And I said, well, how do you do that? So he'd show me a couple. He'd say, let's do this song, let's do that song, and I'll show you where I'm placing my fingers, and maybe you can, figure it out yourself. So I started doing that, and I did it to my newest heartthrob, the Beatles. So I sounded out all of the Beatles songs that I had on the first album that came out. And then after that, that was when I was living with my grandparents again in the 7th and 8th grade. My mother had moved to San Jose, and I really didn't want to move there. I loved my school. I loved the community there. It was wonderful. And I stayed there. And my grandfather was very sick at the time. He'd had a couple of surgeries for emphysema at Stanford. And my grandmother also, they bought a motel, and then they had another hotel built on San Pablo Avenue. And my grandparents were pretty good off. But back then there was no insurance, so with all of that they had to sell one of those, the smaller hotel that they had, to pay for the surgery that my grandfather had at Stanford. He had emphysema. he had been a rancher prior to that in Texas, and he had also worked in the shipyards with all that asbestos. So, and that's why he moved to California from Texas, was to work in World War II. And then I moved to San Jose because my grandparents needed to be in a warmer climate without so much moisture like you get in the Bay Area from the fog. So they moved, and I had to go live with Mom. She didn't want me that far away. And when I moved to San Jose, I hated it. I just hated it in the beginning. I couldn't walk down the street without some girl trying to beat me up. And I looked like a little kid in 7th grade. I mean, I was so tiny. And these girls looked like women. They were very mature for their age. And I'd never hit a girl. I'd only hit my brother and some of his dumb friends when my brother would call me in to help him fight, say, I'm gonna go get my brother Pat, and then I would show up and they'd call me a girl. And that was the biggest insult you could give me. So then I'd wallop them. I was very much a tomboy, besides for the dancing. Kind of strange. So I ended up getting in 2 fist fights with girls on the streets just for walking down the street and them coming out and saying terrible things to me and then clobbering me. And it seemed to be the only way to make friends in San Jose, and I thought it was the weirdest thing I'd ever imagined in my life, but I became friends with every one of them I got in a fight with that would call me horrible names. And the only bright side about moving to San Jose was my aunt lived down the street from us, and that's one of the reasons my mom moved. She needed help. She had had 4 babies in 3 years. She had a set of twins, and then she had a baby every 13 months practically after that. And the twins were both premature, a boy and a girl. So I came every day after school and folded diapers. I could do it with my eyes closed. I did it so much. And change babies, help change babies, and let my aunt have some needed rest that she needed. So I was still going to Catholic catechism, though. Even though I wasn't going to Catholic school, I continued on, and I made my confirmation at the church, St. Joseph's in El Cerrito, which was where I was baptized too. So I had only been really in 2 Catholic churches at that time, and then I moved to San Jose, and I was going to St. Maria Gorrietas. While I was there as a teenager, they had a young priest in his 30s, and they had a lay lady that did the girls' classes, and they kind of separated us. By the time you're in high school, they feel that that's what they should do. And so she taught the girls and he taught the boys, and then we would do events together, like go roller skating or go to the fair or, do something that was going on in the area. Go to teen dances over by University of Santa Clara. In Santa Clara, there was a good boys' school over there that had a big auditorium, and they would have dances, and we would go to those. And my brother went too. And the only reading of the Bible I was doing was through my missal, which is what they call the Bible that just has certain stories in it for a certain day that are going to be read throughout the calendar year, and they're always pretty much repeated, so your missal is good forever, but it does have the Bible in it. But you also have this catechism that you're learning about, which is telling you what all the rules really are, because you might not have enough of them. So anyway, and that was way back in the days when you couldn't eat meat on Friday. That was a sin. And you were supposed to pray to all these saints if you had special needs for things. There was saints for healing of illness, saints for finding lost things. It's just crazy to keep up with all that. I never did. My mother knew it. I would just go to her. So when we moved to San Jose, my mom had not found a very good job. She only had a sophomore education in high school. She had to drop out of high school because her mother died and support herself. And so she couldn't find a job. She was working in the canneries, and as kids started working in crops in San Jose because there was a lot of farms around then. And I was doing cutting cots and sorting tomatoes on a tomato machine and topping onions and doing potatoes, and you name it, I did it. I didn't care. And it was a lot of hard work, and I so appreciate all these people that come into our country to do this work, because it is some of the hardest work in the world that you'll ever do. Anyway, it was hard. We were trying to help my aunt support her family too, because my uncle had been blown out of 2 ships during World War II and had back injuries and couldn't work very much as a trucker. And I was still going to Catholic school, this Catholic thing on Saturday for your education, your catechism. And I noticed that, and all the other kids did too, that the priest and the lay teacher that we had for us, when we did these events, they were smiling and laughing and having a good time together. And it just seemed weird because I'd never seen a priest do that with anybody, you know. I'd never had a young priest. They were always old and grouchy. And so they were falling in love. And he decided he wanted to marry her, and she decided she wanted to marry him. And the Catholic Church sent him over to Africa on a mission. And he got on a plane and came back home, and he married her. And they kicked him out of the church. They excommunicated him, which really upset me because this just didn't seem wrong. It just didn't seem wrong at all. In fact, this seemed pretty beautiful. And they didn't like it. And they told everybody at church about it and how evil he was, and he was excommunicated, and she was part of his sin, and she should have known better. And it was a real castigation of these people in church. It was horrid. So I was not real excited about the church, and there was more unexcited to come about of seeing how ugly this church could be. In high school, I was doing work study, and by my junior year, because we were still kind of, my mom had gotten a better job at IBM, and things were doing better. She wasn't working in canneries and doing work at Fairchild Semiconductor. She was one of the first ladies to work there, and my uncle was a pretty big muckety-muck there. He was head of research and development, my great uncle. My mom got a job there, I got a job there, my brother worked there, my sister worked there, and my cousin worked there. And so I had a lot of family members that have worked there at one point in time. I worked there for 7.5 years. I worked my way through college working there. And by the time I started working there, though, I had quit going to church, not just because of the priest, because in my senior year of high school, I found out that my brother, who had always had problems with the law, my mom didn't want him put in another youth authority. So she wanted the Catholic Church to be involved, and she thought that that would help. And 2 brothers that were at the Novitiate Winery had a contract with the state of California to help boys that were having problems. Well, they lived there, and then they went to public school, not to Catholic school, but to public school. And because they weren't going to pay that for what I guess the state was paying them. And they got these boys drunk, and they molested all of them, including my brother. So when it got found out, and the state was going to prosecute these 2 brothers, one had a PhD and one had a master's degree in psychology, they ended up shipping them to Rome to hide them out. Rome would not give them back, so they never stood trial for their crimes. Anyway, so by that time I was pretty fed up because this church seemed to be full of baloney. So I'm in high school now, and I needed a job. I had had a job for a while, babysitting for about a year, some kids, little kids, and they didn't know anything about God. And I had always had my catechism, you know, when I went to Dick and Marge's, because I went there every day after school to watch their 3 kids. And sometimes I would tell them stuff, and they weren't going to church, but I wanted them to, especially at Christmas and Easter, to understand what was going on. I took them a couple of times with me to church, and my cousins. Oh boy, was that fun. That was like trying to round up cats. Anyway, but I was brave then. And Dick and Marge moved, and moved closer to work and got on day shift, which was nice for them to be more with their children. And I ended up finding a job through my neighbor working at a convalescent hospital. And I was able to get the school to allow me to do it as work study. And I wanted to be a nurse, I really did. My girlfriend's mom, one of my best friends, her mom, Mrs. Halliburton, was a nurse, and she was a surgical head nurse at the County General Hospital. And there was a new program that had come out that she told me about, and another nurse that we had at the hospital had told me about and said, you should try to get into that because you've had nursing experience now, because I did a lot for these people. I came in at 4 o'clock and I worked until around 9, and I would put them to bed, help, serve food and clean them up. And then on the summer, they had me work day shift, and I did a lot more on day shift because I could work 8-hour days. And most of the time I worked on the weekends, so the people that worked during the week could have time off. But I fell in love with all of these patients. I mean, there was very few that ever had any problems that I had problems with. I loved them. It was like having my grandparents back, who I totally missed. And I think that was one of the reasons they hired me, because when they talked to me about, have you ever been around old people? Well, I had. I lived with old people for a long time. And and my grandfather was very sick, and I did help at times with him. So I saved up enough money working for Dick and Marge that I had bought a car when I was 15, and I had what was called an emergency license. So I could drive my aunt and her blind mother-in-law to doctor's appointments and for groceries, because my uncle, when he could work, was a truck driver, and he was usually long distance. So I was pretty mature for a 15-year-old with the car already and driving, but I had to have someone in the car. They didn't have to be licensed, but they had to be an adult, someone over the age of 21. So I'd had my own car bought by the time I was 15, and so when I got this job, which was in Los Gatos, which was quite a ways from me, I could drive there every day. And I loved these old people, but it didn't leave a lot of time to go to church, that's for sure. But I did try to go, and I couldn't go in the evening because I was working evenings, except in the summer. But I could go on Sunday, so because it was over, I didn't go to work until later in the day most of the time. And I'm still attending, a catechism classes, because the whole bang about my brother didn't come out until I was in my senior year. So I noticed one thing about my mom. Considering the problems that she had with my brother and sister, it seemed like she was much harder on me. I had all these rules that they didn't have, and I asked her about that one day, and she said, well, that's because you're more capable than they are, and it's actually biblical that you do more towards your capabilities. And I was like, what? Where does she come up with this one? So she says, maybe you should just go to the library and figure it out, because I was always at the library anyway. So I went down there, and I found myself a concordance. I asked the librarian, how would I look something up in the Bible? So I got into it and found it in Luke 12:48. For everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. So I started to see what she meant. My sister was deaf. My brother had a conduct disorder. That's what they were calling it then. And it went on for him to become what is known as a sociopath, because he kept it up all the way till the day he died. So, yeah. So I did graduate from high school with honors, and I was accepted into that 2-year RN program that I heard about. And due to me witnessing a malpractice that happened in the hospital, I wasn't getting my rotations, and so I quit. Janice's mom, who worked at the same hospital, said, give it up. It's not going to happen, kid. So I did. And then I started majoring at San Jose State in engineering. I had prior to this been, starting at the community college, and I was taking some classes at San Jose State and some at the community college. And I was one of the 2 gals in the engineering program, and the other one, she was real big. So I was getting way too much attention from geeky engineers that I wasn't really appreciating too much. But I'm still praying to God. And I'm working night shift and going to school during the day. And one Saturday morning, I turned on the TV set, and it just happened to be on the channel, It Is Written. And I could not believe what I was hearing. I was hearing stuff for the first time by George Vandeman, things I'd never heard before, in fact, he was talking that day about Jesus' brothers and sisters and his mother coming to find him, and him saying, who are my brothers and sisters? These are my brothers and sisters. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Jesus didn't have any other brothers and sisters. He was an only child. That couldn't have happened, because Mary was a virgin till the day she died. That's what I'd been taught. So there was woo-la-la, Here I am, probably 21 at the time, hearing for the first time that more lies, more things that I had been taught that were total lies. And so it got me very interested. And I was talking to my grandmother every Sunday. She was in Texas, calling me when she'd get out of church and talking to me on the phone and trying to talk me back into church, but not the Catholic church. Wanted me to go to Baptist church, of course. And I was telling her about George Vandeman and what I was watching. So she started watching it on Saturday. And I thought I should go buy a Bible. So I went and bought a Living Bible, and I bought one exactly like it for her. And I sent it to her for Mother's Day. And we started studying this Bible together. And it was just so great to study my Bible with my grandma, because I knew she loved me. She wasn't judging me. She knew what I had gone through in life, and she was just a great mentor for me in general. So it was almost like sitting at Jesus' knee, you know, to have someone that you knew loved you. So I continued to work at IBM. I was there for 5.5 years full-time, and then the last 2 years I did part-time, working in quality assurance as an analyst, running around with engineering changes and doing analytical reports on what's called throughput, which was if we start something here and it ends up there, what is the percentage of stuff we got through? So I would do this report for the production lines I used to work on. When I was at IBM, I did all kinds of things: forklift driving, I was a clerk, I was a machinist, I was an assembler, so I did the gamut. They just move you around. In fact, they used to say IBM stood for I've been moved, so for the employees that worked there. And I was not going to church on a regular basis, and when I did, there was on the campus at San Jose State, there's a chapel. And what I would do, especially before tests, I would go into that chapel and I would pray my heart out that I was going to pass, because I was burning the candles on both ends with working full-time and trying to go to school. And as each year went by, it was getting harder and harder, because I had changed from the engineering major to an accounting major. And so you had a lot of homework, ton of homework. But I was still getting those good grades, but I really had to work at it. And some of the classes I just hated because they just seemed to be political, and they didn't seem to make any sense at all, except you were supposed to parrot back to the teacher what he said. So it was a horrible ordeal going to college, state college especially. But I kept watching George Vandeman. I just loved that on Saturday. I loved him. In fact, one time I got to meet his daughter Connie, and I explained to her how he got me back into the Bible. He got me back into the Bible, because I can't say I was back before that. And that he got me, so here I've had these things with Adventists. But I'd had another event with an Adventist that I just really didn't even understand in junior high. I had met a girl named Mary Alice Prunte. She played the cello too. She lived around the block from me. She'd come over to my house and they would watch TV. And come to find out, they weren't supposed to be there watching TV. And I didn't get it. We were watching American Bandstand, big bad thing. And come to find out, they weren't supposed to be there doing it. When my mom found out about it, she got very upset, because she said, I don't want the Pruntes feeding you, meat on Friday, so you shouldn't be having a TV on when they're here. It's supposed to be turned off. I don't want them sitting in my house. I said, well, then we're sitting in your house. None of it made sense to me, but I did what my mom said, and they weren't allowed to come there and watch TV anymore. So. But Mary Alice's mom came and asked my mom if I would play the cello with Mary Alice for special music at church, and I had to go ask the priest. And when I asked the priest, they said, sure, but I couldn't come through the church. I had to come through a back door and just do special music and then just leave. So this was in junior high, and yeah, so my grandma took me and stayed outside the door. But we'd already been through a lot of this, because she did VBS every year, and I could never go to them, even though, she was the one doing it. And she did the arts and crafts always, because she was so good at that, and I couldn't even go to that. So we were kind of used to that. So after I graduated from college, I got married in 1977, and I became an auditor for the state of California. Still not going to church, but we got married in a Presbyterian church. We did not get married in a Catholic church, because I wasn't going to do that again, I thought. So then we moved to Oregon in 1980, and 3 months later, Mount St. Helens went off. And I thought, gee, I didn't escape any earthquakes, did I? In fact, I got some more earthquakes, and now I'm getting a volcano. So I eventually started working at another company that was a dental manufacturer, and I worked there for 5.5 years, and I adopted my son Ricky while working there. And I had been praying to the Lord that I could have a child, but instead all I seemed to be doing was having portions of my ovaries removed from endometriosis. And I still didn't feel real safe going into a Protestant church because I'd only been in two. Mary Alice's church and the church with my dad. That's the only ones I'd ever been to. And I just was fearful. I was pretty much afraid that if I did, God would strike me dead with a thunderbolt. I mean, it's the kind of stuff the Catholics put in your head. But so I just didn't really go, and I just watched George Vandeman. That's what I did. He was my Saturday dude. And after moving to Newburgh, after moving to Oregon, I started going back to the Catholic Church, thinking maybe God could fix this. I mean, he fixed my head, and you know, I should have been brain damaged, and look what all I had accomplished. And so God was capable of everything. I knew this. And so I started going, and I just didn't believe anything they said anymore. And I didn't go to confession, and I went to communion anytime I felt like it. And church was wonderful to me. I helped with lots of programs there, but I just never let them get into my business. And it was from afar. And then we moved to Newburgh, and I was going to a different Catholic church there, and my kids were in cradle roll. And Father Johnson didn't seem to care that I got married out of the church. He never asked, so I never told, and I kept going to communion and all of that. Then he retired, and a new father came in, Father Aldo. And Father Aldo asked me one day what church I had been married in, and when I told him it was a Presbyterian church, he about came unglued. And a little while after that, I had a heart attack in the middle of the night after having been sick with what was supposed to be mono. And I didn't know what was happening. I thought my lung was collapsing at 3 in the morning. I didn't know what was going on, so I couldn't even move or talk. So I started kicking my husband, and he just was so used to me being a bed hog, he was just in the corner of the bed. And finally, you know, I could get my arm like this to tap him, but I couldn't move my left arm at all. And he took me to the hospital, and they did an enzyme study and said you'd had a heart attack. And I was in there for about 6 days, and with Holter monitor on, and no permanent damage was done to my heart, but they still didn't know why I had been sick with what they kept calling mono. And I was testing positive for mono, but I'd had mono as a teen with my brother and sister, so it just seemed odd that you could get it again so bad. So then my family and I started, I got kicked out of the Catholic Church. During this heart attack time, I asked one of my friends who was a lay worker who I worked with at ADEC if he would bring me communion. And Ken came to the hospital room and that I was in and said, I can't bring you communion. Father Aldo says you're not eligible because you weren't married in the Catholic Church. And I said, well, I've had all my kids baptized Catholic, except, you know, and I had one at the time. And he says, that doesn't matter. So anyway, so I was excommunicated because I didn't do the sacraments with them. And I really didn't care to tell you the truth. So right after that heart attack, I found out I was pregnant with my second son. And seemed kind of strange. In fact, I called up the cardiologist and told him that, you know, what was going on. And he says, no, those heart pills can't do that. I want to do a pregnancy test. And I was the only pregnancy test this cardiologist had ever done on anybody, and he wouldn't let anybody in his office tell me until he was done with seeing his last patient at 5:30. So I'm sitting there at work waiting for him to call, and all the gals are just giggling and laughing, and I'm figuring what is going on. And so he did tell me I was pregnant. So anyway, he was tickled pink, and I was scared that I was going to have a baby with 2 heads after having taken all those drugs to get that inflammation out of the pericardium of my heart. So there was something wrong, and we didn't really know why, but we were happy with this baby and elated with life in general, that this miracle had happened, though we had a lot of family members claiming that they were responsible. My aunt had taken, who is very religious and lives in Maryland, and grew up in Mother Seton's orphanage. She had taken prayers to Rome with her priest, through her priest who went at Christmas time to be on the altar so the Pope would pray on him. And then my husband's grandfather, who was a reflectologist, when we went and saw him, right after I'd had the heart attack and after the bed had caught on fire, that's another story. Bed caught on fire one night when we were at his sister's house, the electric blanket did. When I showed up at his grandfather's house, his grandfather said, "Boy, you're hot stuff, huh?" Anyway, we had to live that one down. And so his grandfather did reflectology on me, and then right after that I got pregnant. So I guess we didn't have a thing to do with that. So then I had Kirk, and then about 20 months later I had Ryan. And after 6 months after having Ryan, I got an earache and an ear infection that they just could not clear with any kind of antibiotic they had. And they didn't know what was wrong. But they did know that I had something bacterial or viral, and they had tested me prior to that for like 250 things, including AIDS, because AIDS was new and big at the time, and of course I didn't have that. And they didn't know what I had. But I had been back east, and I had had this weird thing on my arm. But nobody made the connection on the West Coast, because they weren't talking about Lyme disease on the West Coast. Still, we didn't know what I had, and here I had now, it perforated my brain probably the day after Thanksgiving, and I didn't move in that bed all day, Friday or Saturday. And on Sunday morning, my husband called our babysitter, Grandma Jackie, who was a wonderful Christian woman who babysat my kids in the home after Ryan was born. And she came, and the ambulance met her there. And she went to the hospital with me, praying the whole time. And I had encephalitis of the brain. So this infection is still moving around in my body, deciding to do things. And I had had other problems, organs in my body that had been swollen and had inflammation. And it was just a myriad of things for over periods of years. And nobody could figure out what was wrong. And I was in a coma now, just like when I had had this head injury, but it was much longer. It was 5 days. And I remember trying to wake up a couple of times in the hospital and thinking I was on a merry-go-round. It was the weirdest thoughts that would come to me, and I would see lights, and I would see that I was in a hospital, and I would think, if I could just grab that ring, I could get out of here. It's just like in a merry-go-round with something you would grab. And this dream just kept coming to me all the time. And I'd totally forgotten I had children. I had no idea what was going on, where I was at, what was doing. And so one day in this whole event, right after Thanksgiving, my youngest one was about 2, not quite 2 yet, and he climbed up on the bed, and the older one, Ricky, was at the side of the bed, and I heard Kirky, he lifted up my eyelid, and he said, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, don't die, Mommy, don't die." He was screaming that in my face, and this was just kind of waking me up, you know, and oh my gosh, I have children, that's right. And I could hear my husband out on the hallway talking to the doctor. So slowly but surely, I started getting more and more conscious of things as the days rolled by, and they came and asked me a bunch of questions, and some of them I knew and some of them I didn't. And Grandma Jackie came a lot, and she prayed over me, and she anointed me with oil and prayed over me. And it was just a really hard, sad situation. And when I came to this, I couldn't walk right. I had to have a walker. I had a 6-month-old baby I couldn't pick up. I couldn't bend over and pick him up and carry him or hold his fingers and try to teach him to walk. I couldn't bend over at all, because when I did, I usually fell. Many times I threw up 5 or 6 times a day. I laid in bed and I had bed spin. like I had been drinking, but I hadn't been drinking. I hadn't been having a good time at all. And I had been misdiagnosed with all kinds of things, and finally they decided on lupus. Though lupus doesn't usually do things like this, like that to your brain. And so they put me on prednisone eventually, and I couldn't read. I didn't have the times tables because my eyes would jump around because I couldn't see straight. It was like being on a boat with 5 or 6 foot waves, sometimes bigger than that. And I did eventually start doing things to rehabilitate myself. They had me in water aerobics because I couldn't fall down in the water and get hurt. And my cardiologist had that idea because he had a cardiac person that was actually doing water aerobics at the pool, so I started out with them. And then eventually went from that to just the regular water aerobics. They let me try it one time there at the pool, at our community pool. It was a city pool. And I met this gal and started going to Bible study with her, telling her what I'd been through. She could tell I had some problems. And I started going with her to a women's Bible study at Church of Christ in Newburgh. And then I started going, and I was learning so much. I felt like a sponge, just learning all of this. And I ended up going to what's called Women's Bible Study Fellowship, which was in another city. And I was trying to get my driver's license back so I could go there and do that. That was my big goal, get that driver's license back. I'd been driving, since I was 15. I'd had my own car at 15. So, I wanted this back because it was my independence. And my husband was not dealing with this well, me being sick like this and not able to work and being disabled and having to have the babysitter for the kids and me. But she was wonderful. She was a good Christian woman, and she read the Bible to me when I couldn't read it, and she would study with me too, and I was just getting so excited about Jesus. I mean, he was my reason for living because I was living with someone very angry who was upset at me that I was sick, very upset at me. So I eventually worked my way into doing this Bible study fellowship, got my license back, could drive around town, could figure out directions. I didn't know directions either. That was the other thing. I didn't even know left from right, up from down. It did that. It took away the times tables. There was lots of things that just weren't there anymore. And the bad part was that I remembered that I used to know them. That made it worse. So coming back from this was a 14-year endeavor. And I'd have to say the Lord was the only reason I made it back. He healed me in a way you would never expect. And I was thankful, and I started a support group in my community for people with chronic illness, because when you don't really know what's wrong, and they just slap a label on you because they can't figure it out, and they throw medicine at you until they find something that kind of works. That's what kind of happened to me. But I just did not ever have a positive ANA to have lupus, and it just didn't seem like lupus to me, because it waxed and waned, but they kept saying, lupus is that way too. Well, when they finally did figure it out, it was 14 years since I had had encephalitis, since I had initially gotten sick. So it was a long haul, and I asked, actually, after I visited a doctor when my doctor was out of town, who took over for him, and he told me that I needed to get my affairs in order because people with lupus don't live that long, and I went, huh? Nobody told me that. And so I asked my doctor when he did come back to send me up to OHSU so that I could have a full analysis done. And one of the other things they thought I'd had, because lupus, they sent me to the head of arthritis there. And he immediately noticed all the swollen glands everywhere throughout my body. And he said, your body is fighting an infection. He said, you do not have lupus. You do not have a positive ANA. But lupus is called the great imitator. But there's other things that are. You have something infectious. Let's figure out what it is. Maybe you got it in El Salvador. So he sent me to infectious disease, and it took them about another 14 months of sending my blood all over the world. And I wasn't traveling all over the world, but my blood was. And they sent it down to South America, in fact, in Central America, looking for stuff there. And they didn't find anything, so they finally sent my blood to Rocky Mountain, which is National Institute of Health, and it came back positive for Lyme, ehrlichiosis, babesia, and Bartonella. That's a lot of things, and all due to a tick, more than likely. So they started me on medication. In fact, one of those medications is right now the real bad one. Everybody's talking about hydrochloroquine. I knew it as Plaquenil, but I took that for 7.5 years, plus a myriad of antibiotics, and eventually, after a long period of time, over 7 years, I was free and clear of Lyme disease. When they took me off of it, I was having some issues, but it wasn't Lyme disease. The glands were down. I wasn't sore all over. My joints did not hurt. My muscles did not hurt. I was not fatigued. But in the meantime, after they found out I had Lyme, within a couple of months, I had applied to go to graduate school. I had studied with my kids, relearned myself the times tables, learned to read again by putting rulers like that so I would be on the line of work, and talked to them at the school, and they said, well, you know, there's something called the Americans with Disability Act now, so because of this brain injury, the second brain injury you've had, you qualify for this, so all of your books can be on tape, and we have the tapes for all of your books because we just had a person graduate last year who was blind, and so the blind organization for the state of Oregon had somebody record all the books that you'll be using. That was amazing, because they had been in the same program as I was going into, which was Christian counseling. So I did that program and finished that, and in the beginning of that, when my husband found out that I had applied for this, he said, you're too stupid to do that. You've hurt your brain damaged. That was his words to me. So that was very awful, but I said, too bad, I'm going anyway. This is what the Lord wants me to do. And he didn't want me to do it, but I went anyway. And he was messing around with people at the time, so I really didn't respect much of what he had to say. And I was sick, and I did it to him. That's what he told me. It was all my fault. So I went on and ended up getting a divorce and finished the program. It took me the whole 3 years to do it. They let me do it in a 3-year period instead of a 2. Graduated with honors and started working at one of my internship sites, which was Good Samaritan Ministries. And one of my supervisors there, she wasn't directly mine, but she was one of them there, Nancy. She was Adventist. She was a pastor's wife, and she had gotten divorced because of her husband's sexual improprieties. And so I attended the divorce care class there. I also did a support group for Vietnam vets because my brother had been one. And ended up going to work for another Christian agency in Cornelius that needed help, which was associated with us. And did an internship also at a grade school. So had a lot of different experiences. I had to take marriage counseling, abuse, people that were abused, the whole bit. So it was all over the gamut. And I did that for about 10 years, and it worked well. Then I got married for a second time, and it was a very short marriage, didn't even last 3 years, but again, adultery. And there was his addiction to pornography. So life doesn't always have as big a happy ending as it's going to have for me, which was I started healing from the second divorce, came back to Oregon, didn't want to do too much counseling at all with anybody. I had been through counseling myself, by the way, while I was sick to deal with all of this because it was heartbreaking. And I was dealing with somebody who was very angry about all of it. And I was being physically abused too. So, and he's an engineer with a master's degree from Stanford, go figure. It doesn't matter. Abuse can happen in any marriage, no matter what your education, what your socioeconomic, it happens. So after that divorce, I ended up moving back to Oregon. Prior to that, I lived in Kwajalein with him for a year, did counseling there with people. I lived in Kauai, I did counseling there with people. I had 3 different churches. I was doing divorce care, plus seeing church people in my classrooms at my church during the week. So I didn't have to pay for a place, which was fine. You know, it was really a great situation. And I moved back to Oregon and started flipping houses because I wasn't in a good mood to work with people at the time. I was very upset at myself for having a broken picker, as I called it. And I started attending the Beaverton Christian Church, which I had sent a lot of clients to over the years because they had a lot of support groups. And they did a good job with people. And one of my professors at school who taught ethics was actually the head of counseling, and they had a whole counseling program there with, 5 or 6 interns and 3 actual, licensed counselors. And they were a great church, and it was started by a man who reminded me of George Vandeman in so many ways. And he was just very biblical, and he'd founded that church 25 years before. It just all came to a screeching halt when he left and moved to California to start another church, and the other pastor just couldn't keep it up. And in the meantime, I joined a ski club, wanted to try to see if I could even get more mobility and make my brain work a little harder. And I met a bunch of gals. Didn't ever meet anybody that was male worth dating because they were all a lot of drinking in that club. And but I hung out with a lot of the gals, and many wonderful Christian women I met in that group. And I was going to Beaverton Christian, and one of the gals I would room with every year was Patty. And I found out she had been sexually molested as a child by her grandfather, who happened to be the same name as my grandfather. So our names were the same, and then our grandfather's name. And she just immediately assumed my grandfather had done something. And I said, no, you don't understand. He was nothing like that. That's not on that. But I felt so sorry for her and so sad. I mean, it's hard enough when it's your clients, but it's worse when it's your friends, when it's someone you care for. So I knew of a church over in Gresham, which she lived on the south side of Portland, and I actually went with her because I knew how hard it was to walk into a church where you don't know anybody. That's why I went to the Beaverton, Christian church. I knew people there. I knew people that worked there even. So I went with her and got her involved in the incest survivors group they had and other groups that would help her with Bible study and knowing something. And when she got baptized, her parents wouldn't even come to her baptismal, which I thought was just horrid. And so I went, and her daughter Kelly went, and now both of her daughters have joined that church and been baptized and changed their lives all around. And Patty ended up meeting a man there and got married to him. She has a wonderful life now, and she feels relieved of this burden that Christ has taken from her of what happened to her when it was a child. It was nothing to do with her. It had something to do with the sin. And to forgive the sinner, you have to do that in order to get past it all. So it was very strange how it happened, but at that church, I ended up meeting another gal there, just in the pews talking, and you're shaking hands. And anyway, and she was always coming to sit with Patty and I, and there would be 3 of us blondes there, because Patty was blonde and I was blonde, and then this new gal, Bonnie, that we were meeting. So we asked her a couple of times to go out with us for lunch or, after church, and over to Patty's house a couple of times because Patty didn't live too far away, and got to know Bonnie. Well, Bonnie started telling us about her roommate who was dying of cancer, Kay, and that she just didn't want to watch Kay go away. She just couldn't do it, and to die. So I had 2 spare rooms, so I said, Bonnie, you can move in my house. They're small rooms, but you can have 2 if you want because there's nobody in the other one. So she moved in with me. And she still went and visited Kay, and we all prayed for Kay, and we had churches praying for Kay. And so one day, Bonnie says to me and Marty, my other girlfriend, do you want to go to a birthday party of a friend of mine who's going? She's putting on a big shindig for this other gal, and we have a banquet room, and we kind of need to fill a couple more seats so we can all get the price for this amount. I said, sure, we'll go. So I got Marty to go, and I went. And one of the gals we met there started telling us about this Christian dating site. Well, I had tried one. It was called eHarmony. You've probably seen it on TV. Well, I can tell you, eHarmony isn't going to find you somebody. God will. And God works in a better way. Because when I signed up for eHarmony, now this will make you laugh, and this made everybody laugh that evening when Marty and Bonnie explained it all. It takes a long time to get through eHarmony, your psychological profile. I thought that was probably a good idea, but the idea that meeting a Christian was what I wanted. Well, when the fellow that they matched me up with, it came out, it didn't say what religion he was or what church he belonged to. It just said he was spiritual, not religious. So when I asked him what that meant on the phone, he said he was a warlock. So here we go. Girl who went to seminary, has started learning about God, is being set up with a demon worshiper. And I said, lose my phone number, never call me again. So when this gal was telling us about this dating website, everybody was already laughing that knew me and explaining my devil worship person that I never met, and talking about it. And she says, no, this dating website's different. You know, it's free, you don't pay, because I was upset they wouldn't give me back my money, $89 for 3 months. So this one, she said, it was the strangest and funniest name ever. And I said, what, are you sure? And she said, yes, it's free, and there are really nice guys on it. And the name of the website was Date Hookup. I'm not kidding, Date Hookup. And it was free. And we had the biggest laugh. I mean, between her, my story, and her, you know, talking about this. And anyway, so we, the next day, Marty spent usually Saturday night at my house, and we usually went to church on Sunday. But, and we were going to the Beaverton Christian Church, but it was falling apart around our eye. We knew it. And so Marty says to me, she's a real estate agent. She always had her computer with her because she always had listings coming in or people coming in and contacting her. And so she said, what's the name of that website? I can't remember. It was really funny. What was it? So I told her what it was. And she went on it, and she'd been on all these dating websites. And she says, oh, these guys, they actually do look good. She's right. You know, they're not, you know, like a bunch of bikers and stuff. And, you know, and so she thought they looked pretty good. And she says, oh, come on, let's do it. Let's make up web things for each other. So I made up hers. She made up mine. We took pictures in my house, put them on there. 3 days later, Don Hall contacted me. So I guess God wanted to show me that there were really good men out there, because that was actually still pretty funny as far as I'm concerned. And my church was falling apart, and Don actually went with me a couple of times to my Beaverton church, and I went with him. And then the closest church to my church, Beaverton Christian, was right around the corner, was the Adventist church. And I knew something about the Adventists because of what I had, you know, our agency had a lot of Adventists, not a lot. I'd probably say maybe 10% of our clients were Adventist. And the church actually, the conference up there actually sent people there, so I had a lot of Adventist clients. So I was always hearing about camp meeting and things like that, which, you know, I don't know what camp meeting was, and they had to explain it to me, so it sounded like a great idea. And so I knew a little bit about it, and I did know that there was a woman that was a prophet. And that word prophet kind of scared me because I'd had a bad experience at the convalescent hospital with a woman who was Mormon, and all she did was talk about the prophet Joseph Smith. So once you've had that, you know, around you for a while, you kind of wonder about that word. But the more I got to know about Ellen White and to know about what she was about and what she was preaching and what she was teaching people, I saw it was the truth. It wasn't any made-up stuff. It was all biblical. You could find it to Scripture, so it sounded great to me. And I started studying with Pastor Terry there, and I became baptized and joined the church in Beaverton and was doing really well there, and I loved that church. And they were really excited that I was dating Don Hall. That church was so happy about that. And when we got married, we were going there, and we were traveling there for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, right? All the way over from Happy Valley to over there, about as far as we drive now here. But we loved that church, and Don was doing health ministries there, and we made great friends. And Terry retired, and the younger pastor came in, and that we had there, who was the associate pastor. He was made head pastor, and he was great, and I thought the world of him too. And then he got married. He was single, and he got married, and that was so great. And great gal. He married a great gal, and she was from Australia. No, New Zealand. She was from New Zealand, right? Yeah. Anyway, and she was an architect. So when she came in, they really started doing some neat stuff inside the church. And we had a great time there, and then we decided we would go over to Sunnyside. People at Sunnyside were calling Dawn to come back. And so we ended up leaving and going to Sunnyside, which was much closer to us, and doing health ministries there. And it was interesting. I remember when our pastor, associate pastor Jonathan, was looking at going to Andrews. He had 3 kids, and he didn't really want to move to, Michigan. And so he was asking me about the seminary that I went to, and I told him about it, and he started looking at the program, and the church looked at the program, and they liked it, and so he ended up getting his MDiv there. Then another pastor that went through there, Cara Johnson, she actually ended up getting her MDiv there. So I can speak about the degree that I did get, that our church pays for pastors to go there. And I had to take all of the required religious classes that aren't electives for pastors as pastors did. So, and I was very scared when I went there that I just did not have the background having been Catholic. But I did do all those years of 3 years of study with Bible Study Fellowship with and when I went to talk to the religious side at the school before I entered, I asked him, I said, do you think I have enough of a background to get in this master's program? And he said, you did Women's Bible Study Fellowship? And I said, yeah, for 3 years. He says, which books did you do? And Moses and Mark and John. And he says, I think you've done good. You've probably, because you go all over on the Bible. And I did. I got all A's on my classes at seminary. So I felt I did a good, I had the background. And the thing that was really interesting was going through the classes and taking classes that were electives like spirituality. What is that? And how does that affect you? And it was amazing to find out that we sing hymns, and hymns open our hearts. And I miss singing hymns so much right now. And our hearts being opened like that to God, and it stimulates a certain area of the brain. That was another thing they taught us. And that's why you feel when you sing a hymn that you're so much closer to God. And when you pray, it's that same area of the brain being stimulated, and you feel so much closer to God. And it's the way God made us. He wants to be connected with us. So in hymns and praising and just loving Him, you are connected to God every day, every moment of the day if you want to. It's your ability to do that. So, church family, I miss you all. I can't wait for us to be together again. And I hope that my little silliness of finding the real, true Jesus Christ, which I find Him to be a loving God, not the God of the Old Testament who would open the ground and swallow people up, but the God that showed up in human flesh to show us the way to live. Amen. Thank you.